The numbers that I'm going to share with you in this video are absolutely staggering. And look, I don't use hyperbole in my videos. These figures truly shocked me. It will show you just how much fraud is taking place within our benefits and welfare system, and also just how quickly that system itself is going to collapse under its own weight. And that system collapsing is very, very bad for the people in our society who really do need that help. But of course, Labour will push that off for as long as they can by doing the only thing they can think of: raising your taxes. Let me give you some backstory here. The welfare budget in Britain is absolutely enormous, and it's increasing rapidly. At the moment, we're spending about £300 billion a year on welfare. And to put that into perspective, we spend about £50 billion on defence. So we're spending 6 times as much on welfare as we are for our nuclear submarines, our army, our navy, and our Royal Air Force combined. Think about that. The primary purpose of government is to defend the citizens of a nation, and yet we're spending 6 times as much on welfare as we are on defending the nation. Now, the government does realise that it needs to get this down, and so they put forward a bill to lower some of the welfare payments and try to save £5 billion. But the problem is, the government is a Labour government, and the Labour Party is full of socialists. They weren't having it. They didn't like this. And so Keir Starmer very quickly was facing a rebellion from backbench MPs, and he had to water down the position almost to the point of abandonment. Okay, so why exactly is the welfare budget in Britain getting so out of hand? Well, here's those crazy numbers I was telling you about. In 2019, 26,000 people were claiming PIP for autism. In 2025, it's 114,000. In 2019, 23,000 claimed PIP for anxiety. Fast forward to now, 110,000. In 2019, 4,000 people claimed PIP for ADHD. Now it's 37,000. In 2019, 2,000 people claimed PIP for obesity, right? In 2025, it's 11,000. That's really taking the biscuit. Look, am I a mug? Am I the only person who's not claiming PIP in Britain? Because that's how it feels right now. I'm the only one not getting it. There's even more spurious claims than those. There's people who are getting it for tennis elbow, writer's cramp, and failure to thrive. Failure to thrive is a reason for you to get handouts from the state in Britain. Listen, you don't have to be Sherlock Holmes to work out what's going on here. It's fraud. A small percentage increase of maybe 10 or 15% you could explain. You could say that the population is increasing and we're better at diagnosing things now. But we're not talking about small percentage increases, are we? We're talking about 400% and 500%, or in the case of ADHD, 1,000% increase over the last 6 years. So yeah, it's fraud. And that made me want to go and take a look at the DWP's own website, see what they have to say about fraud rates. And what do you think that they estimate the fraud rate is for 2025? 2.2%. So despite these massive increases in claims, they think that only 2.2% of them are fraudulent. Right, got it. That makes so much sense. Now here's where it gets interesting, because Keir Starmer wanted to save £5 billion by reducing the amount that welfare recipients are getting. But what he should be doing is trying to root out this widespread fraud. The widespread fraud that the DWP is probably telling him simply doesn't exist, but it's very clear that it does. And I say that because if we could get the number of welfare recipients down to 2019 levels, we would save £50 billion per year. That's 10 times the amount that Keir Starmer was trying to save in the first place.
When we talk about the welfare budget, because you are suggesting it should be slashed by a radical £50 billion. How?
Well, it's actually, it's never easy, but it's not quite as impossible as it sounds, because that is the level it was just 5 years ago, before the pandemic. If we got the working age benefit bill down to the levels of 2019, that would save £49 billion.
Would you advocate cutting benefits for people with mental health problems, unless they're very serious?
People who've got mental health problems, that's the heart of where the problem is. We need to treat them, not to sign them off. Do you know, every year we are signing off 80,000 people a year. And we're not just saying you don't have to work. We're saying you don't even have to look for work. And more than half of those are mental health.
I know, but when you were the health secretary, we had this parity of esteem, so to speak, between mental health and physical health. That's created an environment where people think they are entitled to benefits if they have mental health problems. Are you saying they shouldn't claim personal independence payments and such like if they've got anxiety or mild depression?
we absolutely need to completely change the way we treat mental health in the benefits system.
£50 billion. Look, let's just imagine for a second that all of the cases since 2019 were re-reviewed and 50% of them were found to be totally legitimate and 50% were found to be fraudulent. Well, you've immediately saved £25 billion. That's 5 times the amount that Keir Starmer wanted in the first place, and actually it solves a lot of the government's problems. Maybe Rachel Reeves would even stop crying in Parliament. How good would that be? You're probably thinking at this point, that is a mammoth task. How could you re-review all of those cases? And it is a big task, but I think it could be done. And here's how I would go about doing it. I would say everyone who's been granted PIP since 2019, in 12 months' time from this date, your PIP payments will cease. So what you need to do right now is reapply from scratch. And we are going to thoroughly assess you, and we're going to try and get to the bottom of it. No more telephone assessments. They're all going to be in person. And what you'll probably find is that you can eliminate, I don't even know, 10%, 20%, 30%. Yes, you're probably going to hire some more civil servants to do those in-person assessments. And frankly, I'm the last person who wants to see more civil servants. But if we can save 15, 20, 25 billion pounds, this is the kind of thing we should be doing. I'm all for it. And actually, you know what? I found another 12 billion pounds that Keir Starmer could save very quickly. Check this out.
Unfortunately, I'm not done talking about dismal records being smashed, because today we found out that foreigners are costing British taxpayers £1 billion a month in benefits. That is £12 billion a year. We were told we can't afford to heat the homes of our elderly. We were told we can't afford to help our farmers anymore. Yet £12 billion a year for foreigners on benefits. That's where your hard-earned taxpayer money is being spent. Half the cost of the so-called black hole in our public finances.
Right, so £12 billion a year in benefits is being claimed by foreigners. And I want to make this clear. The definition of foreigners that they're using is a much weaker definition than the one that I might use. They're talking about people who don't even have British citizenship. There are people who are not British citizens in this country claiming benefits, £12 billion a year, in fact. And obviously, that is completely terrible. But it's also a great opportunity because it means you can save £12 billion. All you have to do is revoke visas and deport these people back to their home countries. It's that simple. £12 billion, 2.5 times what you were trying to get in the first place. Do it. I really don't have anything else to say. Anyway, Keir Starmer couldn't save the £5 billion that he wanted to, but now they've got to find the money from somewhere. So what do you think Rachel Reeves' plan is going to be? Well, there's only one thing she can do. She can't go to the bond market and try to borrow more money. We're already £2 trillion in debt. It's costing us £100 billion a year to service that debt. That's just paying the interest. That's not even paying the principal, just the interest on our debt. Twice the size of our defence budget just on interest payments. So the only option she really has left is tax rises. And I'm pretty sure that's why she was crying in Parliament, because this was all part of her master plan to not raise taxes, and now she's going to have to do it. Labour did promise in their manifesto that they wouldn't raise taxes on working people. So I think there's a few options that they're going to have to think about, and they'll pick one of them. They can either freeze the income tax thresholds, which is a tax on working people. It's a stealth tax, but they could probably try and justify that to themselves, even though it's unjustifiable. Alternatively, they could try and tax pensioners, because pensioners are ultimately not working people, and so they'd be keeping their manifesto pledge. Or they could try and tax dividends and things like that, increase capital gains tax. Who knows? All I know is there's going to be more tax rises, and Rachel Reeves isn't too happy about it. Not good. I want to make something clear at this point in the video, by the way. I truly do believe that as a society, we should be looking after the neediest people. And that's not because I'm some rabid socialist. I'm speaking from the point of like a John Rawls veil of ignorance style of philosophy. And I'm not going to go into all of that. If you know what it is, you understand what I'm talking about. If not, you can look it up yourself. I don't want to make this video an hour long. But we should look after the neediest people in our society. And I'm talking about the people who simply could not survive without our help. Not the people whose life is like 3% worse without our assistance, okay? That's not how this should be working. Because then pretty much everyone could make a claim. I mean, there are times when I'm trying to focus on doing a task and then something nice and rosy comes along and then I get distracted for a while. Does that mean I've got ADHD? Should I be making a claim for PIP? Well, maybe I should, because it seems like everyone else in Britain is claiming PIP at the moment, and I'm the last man standing. But no, I shouldn't. And we've got to be realistic about, you know, the level of detriment that your life faces without PIP, and whether it's actually worth giving that to you, because otherwise this system is simply going to collapse under its own weight. And I will add this, I actually think the collapse of the British state, welfare state, a socialist state, is basically inevitable at this point. I think it's almost certainly going to happen. It just seems completely unsustainable. Working people are taxed to the absolute brink, but things like welfare costs for you know, benefits, but also pensions, they're all increasing. Now they're talking about increasing the defence budget, which they should have done a very long time ago, but all of this costs money. We're maxed out on debt, 2 trillion in debt, over £100 billion a year going in interest payments alone. We can't borrow that much more money, especially when the Chancellor spooks the bond market by crying, and that actually cost the British taxpayer like £2 billion this year. It's totally insane. We really have nowhere left to manoeuvre. I think governing Britain right now is kind of a poison chalice. Whoever steps into that role is going to find it very, very miserable. Unless they take some very extreme action, but even then they're going to find it very miserable because everybody's going to hate them. This is what happens in socialism. Now, Argentina did this, and they just tried to keep going with the socialism and massive rates of inflation, and people were miserable and poor. And it took someone like Javier Milei to come along and say, actually, we're totally doing this a different way. We're going to scrap all of that, scrap all of these government departments. We're going to become lean, mean, efficient. We're going to get Argentina back on its feet. And he did it. And I think eventually that will come to Britain. We will have a leader. And there are people who are talking about this, right? Like the Great Repeal Bill and things like that. There are people who are saying some of the right things. But eventually we're going to have a leader who steps into that role and can actually get it done. But we're not there yet. And I do think that, unfortunately, for people to realise how desperate the situation is, the British state will have to collapse first. And to an extent, this might sound bad, but I'm a bit of an accelerationist as far as that sort of occurs. Because I think it's inevitable, I would rather it happen sooner. As crazy as that sounds, because then we'll have more debt and we can get on with fixing the country a lot sooner. Maybe that sounds really crazy, heartless. Am I saying we should have Angela Rayner as Chancellor? I don't know, maybe, because then the whole country would collapse in 2 weeks. Let me know what you guys think. I don't want to draw this video out too much longer. Really interesting topic. I hope you found it interesting. Some of those figures are completely insane as far as I'm concerned. And I'd love to hear what you guys think. Till the next one, please do leave a like, comment. If you're not subscribed, subscribing would be fantastic. And I'll see you in a future video.